Okay, so your prep tonight is on androgyny. And if you haven't got a handout, you should have one from the lesson. If you can't find it, or you've lost it, or you weren't in the lesson, then you can access this from the blog. Okay, so you can download one, print one from the blog. Right, so what is androgyny? Androgyny, as you'll see from this first sentence, is the term that's given to describe one individual. I've got here describe people. We should be saying one individual who possesses qualities that are seen as both masculine and feminine. Okay, you can't say male and female. That's not correct. That's a completely different thing. So androgyny is about one person who has the qualities that are seen typically as masculine and feminine. Okay, so why is this so important? Why do we have to study it? Well, people who refer to androgyny assume that these differences between males and females, or what is masculine and feminine, are socially constructed qualities. And the problem with that is that if they're socially constructed, that means that they could restrain people, constrain people. Okay, so in other words, it could inhibit somebody, male or female. Okay, so this isn't about it isn't necessarily about equality. It's not about being sexist. It's just saying that people who have certain qualities, whether they're more stronger or masculine or feminine, may be constrained by what society expects of them. And unfortunately, that could inhibit their development, and they also believe that that will increase their mental ill health. Okay, so that's important. So, in other words, if we are encouraging androgyny, we're trying to eliminate any sex role stereotyping that we have. And the people who believe this will also believe that that can help somebody become much more psychologically healthy. Those who believe in androgyny believe that if we hold very rigid sexual stereotypes, people who do hold those very rigid sexual stereotypes are actually going to be those with more likelihood of developing mental ill health, things like anxiety and so on. Okay, so the person you need to associate with this is a woman called Sandra Bem, and I just highlight this for you. So Sandra Bem is the name that you need to associate with androgyny. Okay, she thinks that androgyny exists. She thinks it's measurable, and she thinks it's a good thing. It's very desirable. Okay, so what she devised was something called the BEM, that's obviously after her name, the BEM Sex Role Inventory. Okay, it's sometimes referred to, after this it might be referred to as the BSRI. Okay, and what it was a psychometric test to measure androgyny. Alright, so remember, she thinks it exists, she thinks there's a way of measuring it, and she thinks it's going to be a positive thing if somebody scored highly on it. So what does she do? This is the method. Okay, so in order to test it, participants are given a list of 20 masculine and 20 feminine traits, as well as 20 neutral traits. How do they get those traits? How do they come up with those characteristics? Traits is another word for characteristics. How does she get them? Basically, she asked students for their own lists, okay, of traits that they thought were masculine or feminine, and characteristics that they thought were neutral. You guys have already done a little bit of a questionnaire on this. There is another androgynous questionnaire that you can do if you want to. Okay, so in order to complete this BSRI, participants indicate which of the words they consider desirable for them, and that was rated on a 7-point scale. Okay, it's known really as a type of Likert scale. That's another name for it, but basically all we need to say is it's a type of psychometric test. Okay, a rating scale. And basically they then give a score, and in this particular one you don't need to know this, how it was added up, but you've got some detail on that. Okay, examples of the traits you need to find from the textbook. There are probably some that you could come up with yourself, but I want you to use the ones in the text. Now what's interesting was BEM tested this on over 1,000 students. Let's see if we can get that highlighted. 1,000 students, that's actually quite a decent sample. It's quite a good size, and what we would want to say about that is that we can, if we've got quite a good cross-section of students, then actually we can apply that to other students. But we have to be wary of that, because we have to know where she got the students from and so on. Okay, so it's a good sample, a good size sample, and therefore one would say that it perhaps has reliability if she found that from 1,000 students. So what I want you to do is fill in from the text what the results were. I also want you to check what we mean by reliability. Reliability is really consistency, and it's important. We need to know, if we're going to test something, we need to know that it's reliable, that it's valid, and that we can generalize from it. Okay, otherwise there's not much point in having those results. So I want you to check how she tested for reliability. Now, what else is interesting about this? Okay, so what's useful about this is that it can be used to correlate with other tests. Now, this word correlation, you're going to study correlation as a method later on in the term, but it's quite important because a correlation does not prove anything. All it's showing is that there's a relationship between variables, and we have to be wary of correlations. Often people think that when you have correlational results, that it somehow proves something, and it doesn't. Okay, so be wary of that. So what Bem found was that, and what she came up with was a set of 4 different dimensions. We have here a feminine score, we have a masculine score, and we have low and high femininity and low and high masculinity. What she found was somebody who was high on masculine and high on feminine characteristics was what she termed androgynous. If you were low on a feminine score but high on a masculine score, you can see you would be classified as masculine. If you were low on the masculine score but high on the feminine, you'd be classified as feminine. And if you were low on both feminine and masculine, you would be called or termed undifferentiated. Okay, undifferentiated. So masculine and feminine probably seem quite logical. This is a new term for you, undifferentiated, as well as androgynous. Okay, so what's the big deal? So what? What's this all about? Well, the thing is that we've already said, people like Bem believe that this is going to be linked to your mental health, okay, and therefore linked to mental ill health. And remember what she's saying is that somebody who was classified as androgynous would be able to kind of be the person they want to be. They wouldn't be constrained by what society expects. They wouldn't be constrained by sex role stereotypes, gender stereotypes, and therefore they're likely to be more psychologically healthy. So the evaluative comments are really discussing that. Okay, so let's have a look at these and what the evidence is for and against, in other words, to support her and against her. So number 1, Bem herself, as well as others like her, others who've followed on from her footsteps, have found that individuals who score high on androgyny are actually more psychologically healthy than those who seem to be much more stereotyped in their expectations and their behaviours. So that's number 1. Okay, so number 2, Spence, somebody who's supported Bem, actually continued with this sort of research and found that those who were high in androgyny had the highest self-esteem, and then the highly masculine group, then the feminine group, and finally the undifferentiated had the lowest self-esteem. Okay, so that's supporting Bem because it's finding very similar results to her. She was saying that they were mentally more healthy. Obviously, if you've got higher self-esteem, you're less likely to have mental health issues. Number 3, it's not that straightforward because people like Whiteley have suggested that the most psychologically healthy were not the ones who were most androgynous, but in fact the ones who rated themselves higher on masculine traits. That's quite interesting. That's a contradiction to what Bem found. So the question is, does that prove Bem wrong, or is that really the result of the sort of society we're in, which is very masculinely dominated, really? Okay, and perhaps that's what we are to expect in the sort of society we're in today. Number 4. Okay, with all the research we do, we should always be looking at different factors. How reliable is it? How valid is it? What else do we know about it? So let's have a look at point number 4. But point number 4 says, if BEMS scale is valid, okay, and validity just means accuracy. So if something's valid, it means it's accurate, that it really is testing what it claims to test. So if it's a valid test of androgyny, what else do we know about her test? So for example, her sample. Okay, so this might be an issue, her sample. Well, who did she use? A sample, by the way, is just the group from the target population that you use. And you find the results and then you generalize that back to the whole target population just from that sample. So who did she use? She used students from Stanford University. Stanford is a very prestigious university in the States, and so probably not very representative of a cross-section of students, really. All right, these are going to be incredibly bright students, probably more motivated than others, probably more ambitious, etc., etc. So some people will say this is a biased sample. Check the spelling of biased. Over and over again I get students who just say bias without the ed. It's biased sample. All right, and if it's a biased sample, that's not good. So we've got a question from her results, whether we can actually generalize that to the whole population. Okay, point number 5. Linked to this is the question of question of validity. Right, remember I've said validity is accuracy. Is it accurate? Okay, now this was US students and it was done in the 1970s. Okay, so we're talking a long time ago now. And maybe what was desirable traits for being masculine or being male or female, masculine, feminine in the 70s is actually different today. So sometimes, and if you can use this term, we talk about it lacking historical validity. So there's the problem with validity. Maybe it doesn't really apply to today's times. Okay, so it has a limited validity as a measure of masculinity, femininity in all societies at all times. Perhaps it's not applicable to us in, 2013 or whatever. Okay, and finally, point number 6. BEMS test, though, on the other hand, we've already seen, had good test-retest reliability. What does that mean? Well, test-retest, you've already read about. Let me just cover it for you. Basically, we're trying to make sure that our results are reliable. That means consistent. So if I give you a test today, let's say an IQ test, and I find out that your score is 100 on IQ, and then I test you again next week, you should be very similar, all right? You should be almost identical, if not identical, to that test, if the test is reliable. If you score 100 today and next week you score 80 and the following week you score 120, then those tests are not reliable because you're bouncing around all over the place, okay? They should be reliable, they should be consistent. That's what we mean by reliability. So what is test-retest reliability? Okay, what is that? It's really important that you get to grips with these terms. Test-retest is exactly that. If I test you today and then I test you another day, I should get very consistent results. If I don't, we would say that test is not reliable. Okay, and it depends on what sort of test it is. We tend to give something like a 3-week period between the two, so you haven't developed and changed because you've developed and matured, but at the same time you are not, remembering the details from the previous test. Okay, so that's what we've got on androgyny, and that's the preparation you need to do for the next lesson. And next lesson, we're going to have a look at some stuff on this.